Good morning, everybody. Dobry din, g'daiden, and welcome to our virtual meeting on clean growth, organised by the Department for International Trade. First of all, I'd like to give the opening words to Edmund Mahler, the Director of International Trade based in Kazakhstan. Over to you, Edmund.
Thank you. I'm delighted to follow Ross and to welcome our distinguished speakers and participants from Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Mongolia, Russia, and the UK. The shift towards a green economy and implementation of low-carbon technologies is a priority for many markets now, and Kazakhstan and our region as a whole is no exception. We're very glad that Kazakhstan is already shifting towards a green economy, and we will remain very keen to support it. Kazakhstan's already taken several important steps in that process. It's developing more renewables projects and looking to use clean tech in its coal industry, if not to convert its coal to gas-fired power stations too. And its environmental code based on OECD standards is another crucial step to help minimize the mining sector's impact on the environment. It will also stimulate the development and use of cutting-edge low-carbon technologies. We all know that Kazakhstan's mining and metal sector has massive potential for development. And it's important to note that it has already launched an ambitious plan to develop the sector, in particular becoming a CRISCO member in 2017, adopting a new mining code based on the Australian model in 2018, and injecting a clear and transparent decision-making process to ensure a stable and predictable investment climate. The new environmental code is another important step to attract inward investment here, as the procedures of environmental permits and implementation of best available technologies are in line with the OECD's, the requirements and regulations that investors are familiar with globally. And the UK, for its part, has a lot to share in this area, being one of the leading nations in the development of key low-carbon technologies, solutions, and services. While we don't have many active mining operations in country here in Kazakhstan so far, our supply chain for clean growth is extremely strong and covers all important segments of the mining and metals industry, including tech and services for environmental monitoring, the reduction of CO2 emissions, water management, soil remediation, mine closure and legacy planning, and waste management. All of these areas will be covered today by UK speakers, representatives of businesses and academia. Some of them are already doing business here in Kazakhstan, and others are very keen to enter the market. And so I hope you each find this event both stimulating and helpful to further your own clean growth business interests. And I wish you all a very successful event today. Thank you.
Thank you, Edmund, for those great words to start today's event. And now we want to hear more about what's going on in the ground in Kazakhstan. We've heard about the new environmental code, and to tell us more about it, I'm very happy to introduce Maxim Kononov, who's the Deputy Executive Director of the Association of Mining and Metals Enterprises of Kazakhstan. Maxim.
Thank you.
Good morning, distinguished participants of the webinar. My name is Maxim Kononov, and I am from the Association of Mining and Metallurgy Companies. Thank you very much. I'm thankful to the organizations for the invitation. The topic is very interesting, and I believe that today we are going to have very interesting discussions. As Edmund already mentioned, Kazakhstan has actually started smooth transition to greener technologies, and now we are developing both environmental code and the concept of low carbon development, which in its turn is also aimed to reduce negative impact, first of all, from the industry on the environment. Last year, in November, I was lucky to participate in one of the activities organized by OECD. And this activity was devoted to similar topics called green bridge and sustainable development of mining sector. It was a very inspiring event that included presentations of such project as hydrocarbon fuel, and for us another interesting initiatives which are too far for us, and we know that Scandinavian states have progressed significantly in this direction, but here we have to admit that the majority of the enterprises still consuming carbon, and they have been constructed already in 1940s, 1950s, and to be fair, we must mention that there is significant gap in technologies. How we can bridge this gap is a key task for us, is a key task for our new environmental code. And in my presentation, I would like to speak about this document in more details and share with you about the key aspects of this document directly related to the mining sector. The document itself is already in the parliament, and we are expecting that it will be adopted by the end of the year and come in force since the 1st of January 2021. Coming to the key innovations established by the new environmental code, first of all, it is a transfer to a comprehensive environmental permits that will be issued on the basis of the best available technologies. The best available technologies is a backbone on which all the discussions are developing, and we as the countries have to decide what will be recognized as the best available technologies. Will it be European standards, or we will be using Russian standards, or maybe it will be Kazakhstan standards, which are based on real current conditions of this sector. And now we are having significant long discussions around these topics, and the draft code nowadays says that these standards will be based on European approaches, but the discussions are really hot.
Why is it important? We all understand what kind of threshold is going to be established, and this will impact our follow-up steps in this area. We, as an association representing the interests of the companies, we foresee the most realistic approach because, let me reiterate, we recognize that there is a huge gap between those technologies that some companies apply compared with the best advanced companies in the world. Therefore, we are for a step-by-step approach. The work is going to start soon to prepare this reference book. There is a Center of Green Technologies which was established specifically to design this book. And this reference book, this is question number one. Question number two, how these comprehensive environmental permits are going to be issued, what kind of obligations the companies are going to undertake. For the first category, and the biggest mining companies are included into this first category, starting from 2025, that transition will be mandatory for this category. That means that the companies will have to undertake the responsibility to move to best available technologies and to achieve by between 2025 to 2035 those standards. A stimuli that would be used by the companies would include increased rates for emissions. The rates are going to be to double from 2025 and then fourfold and eightfold. It's not kind of incentive, it's an incentive with the minus sign for the mining sector. And for the mining companies, this will be a must to comply with those requirements. Given the current economic situation, we recommend the government to apply not only the political approaches, but also some real incentives. And depending on what kind of taxation benefits or certain import duties release, everything is going to impact the decision of the companies whether they would achieve or not achieve the final results in terms of reduction of emissions and implementation of technologies. Another important aspect for the first category and the mining sector is the establishment of automated monitoring system over emissions, which is quite expensive. However, many companies are dealing with this at the moment, and from many sources, in many companies, these systems were established. The problem is about the sensors, whether they would fix accurate, basic indicators, and based on which certain penalties would be applied. We believe that some deviations must be allowed because if it's strictly fixed, any changes, and you know that that electricity supply is not always stable, and even a small increase in emissions would lead to higher penalties. It is an issue that has to be discussed and debated further. And the aspect number three, the changes in approaches to waste management in mining sector and in production sector in general. It is very important for Kazakhstan and one of the key aspects actually because we have accumulated about 42 billion tons of man-made waste that has to be treated and somehow managed to reduce the negative environmental impact of that. In our opinion, unfortunately, that environmental code is not fully compliant with these requirements. It has a special section on waste management in mining sector with pretty clear provisions for it, but there is a gap dealing with metallurgical waste, for example. And what is even more important, it's not an environmental regulation how to deal with the waste management, but the environmental aspects per se. Today, we recognize it as a fully fledged raw material, and with the secondary placement of man-made mineral waste, you have to pay for its placement, and to some extent, it provides a negative incentives for focusing on waste management, and we do hope that the forthcoming reform would be able to help to address this issue. We live in a global world, and we understand that the issues of ecology and the environment are hot topics for everyone. In the EU, they're actively discussing the introduction of hydrocarbon tax on items on goods. In fact, it's going to be a kind of an import duty. And we understand that if we want to preserve European markets for marketing metals, for instance, those requirements for the products should be a must for us. But we need to understand that they have to relate and we have to take into account the European requirements when we introduce best available technologies. Many companies are moving towards that. Some companies which participate in our webinar, they established even special departments, divisions for that, such as Duke and Simon. They are actively involved into implementation of the incentives established in environmental code. That's it from my side. I would be happy to further take your questions, and I'm looking forward to have a fruitful discussion with you. Thank you once again.
Yep. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for letting me present here as well. My name is Henrik Fries, and I will present a little bit from environmental monitoring. This is my colleague based in Kazakhstan, Tatiana Dilman, who will also do a little bit of this presentation for us. But basically what we wanted to introduce for you is environmental monitoring and the need for environmental monitoring in the mining sector. So in general, environmental monitoring demands for the mining sector, this is kind of global, that most mines will have some form of environmental obligations, and that is in addition to the permit to actual mining, but there's also some environmental obligations in terms of reporting and taking care of the environment, discharge the water, air emissions, groundwater, surface water, and so forth. These requirements that mining companies will have from an environmental perspective, that differs from different jurisdictions. So for instance, it's different in different parts of the world. So different in Canada, different to Australia, different to Kazakhstan, different in Russia. But it could also be very different within these different jurisdictions because the environments are very different. In general, there's also normal environmental demands after life. So when the mine is closed, there might be demands to restore the area to what it used to be. So these are some general environmental demands that we have on mining companies. But we are going to talk a little bit about a case study that we have done in Kazakhstan, and this is for Central Asia Metals, the Konrad site. It's in southern Kazakhstan. Central Asia Metals mine or extract copper from an old waste dump. But as such, so the setting for this case study, for this project that we've done in Central Asia Metals, is that they have hundreds of boreholes where they measure groundwater levels, groundwater quality, and so forth to make sure that they're not polluting the groundwater. The Konrad site has an environmental permit issued by the government, which means that they have to monitor certain things, they have to report on certain things. This environmental permit has individual thresholds and limits for these different boreholes. So there might be a plethora of the limits to uphold and to monitor. There is also monitoring and reporting requirements. Obviously, if they are breaching any of these thresholds or any of these limits, they are required to be reporting on this to the government. The company also has, as I mentioned before, requirement to restore the area after mining has been ended, to restore the area to its natural surroundings. But in terms of what Central Asia Metals did with this and how they managed this, I invite my colleague there, Tatiana Dilman, who has been on site and have been working with this and implemented a software solution to manage all these issues. So, Tatiana?
Hello, everyone. I worked at Central Asia Metals PLS. It was my previous place of work, where I experienced using Monitor Pro. there we had, and they still have, enormous amount of data, because as Henrik mentioned, we had more than 300 boreholes and about 64 parameters that we monitored there just for water. Also we had soil quality, air quality, waste management, and it was several Excel spreadsheets with hundreds of tabs. And we have 12 person in environmental department, and when you send Excel spreadsheets between yourself, it could be corrupted because somebody corrupt formula, somebody delete some rows, and it was mess. So we bought Monitor Pro, and advantage of this was that we have all data in one location, and this data you could not corrupt because you can track all changes there, who was changed, when it was changed, what previous measurement was. So you have safe and secure place. Also, it saves a lot of time because you can receive data straight from the lab and you're not involved in this process. And you have several tools there for QA QC. It's also big advantage that you set up thresholds there and you have warning before possible contamination. So you have time to implement your action plans, so you are not in trouble. And also it's very easy to demonstrate for stakeholders, for your senior management, because you can create graphs and analyze data very quickly. So next step that should be done, it's collect all type of environmental data. It should be automate reports to stakeholders, because now you just pull the data and include it in reports, and in the future it will be automated process. Also you can manage obligations there, and next big step for Kaunrad site and for all enterprises will be that you can calculate greenhouse gases there, because according to the new environmental code, it will be very important point. And also because of this big amount of data, you should track it from year to year for your afterlife plan. So this software is very useful because you will not lose any data. You can store it there 10 years, 12 years, 20 years, and you have it all in one place, and then you can use it for your afterlife plan. And at Central Asia Metals, we even already use some amount of data for previous year to prepare liquidation plan at early stage. So Henrik, your turn.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Yeah, as you heard, an environmental software is very important to manage your environmental data, as Tatiana explained. What I just wanted to touch upon very, very briefly here is how we interpret the situation in Kazakhstan. We have heard that there is a new environmental regulation. The way we see that regulation is that it's becoming much more aligned with and similar to the environmental regulations that you see elsewhere in the OECD countries. So like similar to what's in Australia, what's in Canada, US, UK, which means that there's an increased demand for the companies to do reporting on their environmental performance and what they do and how they deal with things. That is a bit of a shift from a more of a governmental control, because the government will now look more at enforcement. So they are going to rely more on reporting and check reporting, and based on that, which means that environmental data is becoming much more important and much more critical for the company in order to have a good report and to have a verified data stream that they can prove what they're actually doing. We're also seeing increased requirements for afterlife. That is what both Tatiana and I have talked about before, that you will need to restore the environment where you have done mining to the pre-mining use. In order to do that, you will need to have a good repository of legacy data. So you will need to have data. What did the environment look like before you mined? What has happened during mining? And how do you restore that? So there are huge increases of robust and proper environmental management system and data management system for mining companies. You have now listened, and thank you for listening a little bit to us. We are from a company called EHS Data and Alpha Safety, respectively, and we support this kind of system. So if you have any question to us, please feel free to contact either me or Tatiana, and we'll be happy to talk more about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Henrik and Tatiana. That was great. Apologies, everybody. I didn't just fall asleep. We're having a few technical problems here, so I wasn't able to speak at the end of the last presentation. So I'd like to belatedly say thank you to Maxim, and nice beard. I see Henrik's beard is getting bigger as well. I guess this crisis, as well as all the regrettable deaths, but will be known as the year of the beard. So Henrik, it's good that what you said. In the process improvement world where I used to work, they used to say that you can't manage what you haven't measured. And Monitor Pro is a great system for measuring and monitoring what's happening in the environmental world. So thank you for that. And next, we have another very serious subject, tailings management. As you all know, in January 2019, there was a disaster in Brumadinho in Brazil, where 11.7 million cubic meters of mining waste surged down towards a town, causing 270 deaths and 5 miles of destruction. And as a result, tailings has become a big focus for all mining companies. There are 2 to 3 tailings failures per year, and they should be avoided at all costs. And the reputation of the industry is affected by such disasters. So Kaz Minerals have been doing a lot of work on their tailings facilities. As a newish producer, they're able to think about the best practice and plan for tailings in a good way. And so we're very pleased that Trent's able to tell us about that. So over to you, Trent.
Thanks very much. So I'm the head of tailings for Kaz Minerals. I've been with the company now about 1.5 years. We are going forward with tailings. The Brumadinho disaster got a lot of mining companies going in terms of their tailings management. We started a bit before that, but it is one thing that that's the tailings disaster everybody mentions, but it's been 2 to 3 tailings disasters per year for the last 120 years that have been recorded. So we can thank the editor at the BBC who decided to start playing tailings failures as a big issue to get it into the public eye. And there's been a lot of action around the world since, with both the development of the global tailings standard that's expected to come out in the next month, as well as the new environmental codes moving forward in Kazakhstan. And so as Kaz Minerals, we've got our new facilities and our old facilities, legacy sites, and we're moving forward as a company to make sure we've got best practice ahead of these upcoming legislations, hoping that we are ahead of the curve. So for those of you who aren't hugely familiar with tailings, tailings is the waste that comes out of the tail end of the process plant. It's the crushed rock with the resource removed, with processed water and processed chemicals. Now, some of those chemicals may have environmental impacts, but one of the things we're moving towards and we're trying to get out there is that just because something is detrimental to something doesn't mean it's detrimental in every situation. So we're going down the the source receptor pathway models. So you need to know where any potential impact might start, how it could get to anybody that could take it, and then if there's any receptors that are sensitive to the material in the right concentrations that might come out. So that's that kind of thing. What we do with the tailings once they've come out of the mine is we must store them in what we call a TSF, or a tailings storage facility, or sometimes in a lot of European contexts it's called a TMF, or a tailings management facility. I've got 2 photos at the bottom of this slide. One is some tailings coming from a spigot at one of our mines in the eastern region of Kazakhstan. The other photo is an aerial shot of our tailings dam recently from our Aktagai mine. You can see it covers a very large area. The final footprint of that tailings dam for the life of the mine is expected to be about 4,500 hectares. So it's a monstrous facility, huge potential impacts on environment, cost for the mines, risk. While our Aktagai mine is very low risk in terms of environment and population, it's nothing to be sneezed at, because we need to make sure that we do it properly. So when we're talking about tailings management, I'll just go on to the next slide. A lot of people think because tailings is waste, you should treat it like other waste, like municipal waste or others. And the best practice for those kind of wastes in a sustainability kind of talk are to reduce, reuse, and recycle. However, that's not entirely practical for tailings. You can't reduce the amount of tailings you have unless you reduce the amount of material you've mined. Mining is an essential industry for our modern world, so reducing the amount of ore mined and the amount of tailings mined isn't practical for the industry. We've spoken about recycling old tailings when new processing technologies come out. You can put tailings through process plants, and we are investigating that at some of our mines. However, you don't actually reduce the amount of tailings by recycling them, you just have to move them to a new location. And then reusing tailings themselves. Some people have talked about using tailings as a construction material. However, sometimes that can be practical if the tailings has the right properties and it's close to a construction project where those materials can be used. But unfortunately, sometimes the processing costs can be high, as well as the transport costs. And so reusing isn't practical. Tailings is a forever product, so we have to think about what is best practice for that, given that the usual waste management hierarchy of reduce, reuse, recycle isn't practical in a tailings sense. So we need to continue to store that in tailings facilities. think about what else is best practice to make sure that it is both used sustainably and safely. And so I'll go forward onto the slide as that comes up. And so best practice for tailings is to make sure that it's stored in the long term in a safe and sustainable manner. So safe and sustainable storage entails a few things, but some of the biggest ones are to prevent any substances that are potentially detrimental to the receiving environment from escaping the TSF. We want to save on water, we want to save on resources, so we don't want to waste water. We want to make sure that we use that wisely, and we want to reduce the amount of energy required to run the facility. There's other ways, but those are the three main ones that we've been focusing on. In terms of the first instance there, you can see that I've got on the slide some ways that substances might leave the TSF. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean these are detrimental to the receiving environment, but these are the ways that we want to control on the basis of having done studies. You know, you study your baseline, your receptors, and these are the things that we try to manage. So we make sure our groundwater seepage doesn't contain high concentrations of detrimental chemicals. We'll make sure any seepage that goes through our embankments is collected and isn't detrimental, that any surface runoff is controlled so that we don't get overtopping. We want to control our dust. We want to certainly make sure we handle any catastrophic failures, which would entail a tailings or water release. And sometimes there's other forms of tailings migration if people have used the wrong materials to contain the tailings in the first place. The photo I've placed at the bottom of the slide there is our facility in Kyrgyzstan, which is a lined dry stack facility, and I'll go into some of the namings of those material or that later. It's considered one of the safer, more environmentally friendly facilities in Central Asia. It's, as far as I'm aware, the only dry stack facility that we have around. And I'll go into that on the next slide. So to address those issues of safe and sustainable management through controlling all those different ways in which tailings can release, as well as you know, the energy and the water requirements. So the main issue with the main way that we're approaching these is through smart deposition methodologies. So rather than just the old methods of just pumping tailings into a field and hoping everything's the best, we're using three what are considered kind of new methods or more intelligent methods of placement of our tailings, and that's at Aktagai and Boshakal, our biggest operations. We use a central thickened discharge model. I'll explain in a second what that is. At Bozumchak, as I've said, we use the filtered tailings stacking, and at our Nikolaevsky, we are transferring to in-pit deposition. And so what that does is down the bottom, you can see an aerial photo of the deposition ramp at Aktagai. There's two photos at different zooms. And central thickened discharge means we remove most of the water at the process plant. So we save the costs of pumping that water out to the dam and then back again. That saves on the energy and all that sort of stuff. But what it does allow is, with the circular distribution, it allows us to keep the surface wet, which controls dust. Because the surface of the tailings beach is steeper, so that means water reports to our water return system faster. And that means that you know, so we lose less through evaporation, we control dust. The steeper area means that we use less energy to build the embankments. We use less area to cover ground. And because it's less water in the product. It means that there's less risk of tailings flow and catastrophic failure. So that's for dry stacking as well. Dry stacking is when you actually, so central thicken discharge, we remove enough water to have the tailings to about 60 to 70% solids. Dry stacking actually removes enough water to bring the water content down to about 14%. And there you're basically compacting a soil product. It's a solid rather than a liquid, like most tailings. Makes it very safe. With the in-pit deposition, all those previous ones are addressed, but you also have the added advantage of backfilling an existing void, which helps with closure and environmental outcomes. So that's how we go there. One of the ways we're addressing other things like failures and monitoring and all that is we've gone through and we've mandated for our facilities that they must have an emergency spillway. Very important aspect of making sure that your tailings dams are safe and secure is having as many eyes as possible look at those dams. So we have individual tailings managers on each site. We have myself as a central corporate-wide look over. Then we have an engineer of record, which is an engineer, an independent of our company, who designs and looks at our facilities through operation towards closure. And then we also have a third-party auditor. We're at the moment using Knight Peasold from London. They come in once a year with a view to assess how we're performing, how our designs are performing, and to give recommendations based around world's best practice for that. So again, the next thing we're doing is we're making sure to monitor our tailings dams, and we've heard about monitoring and data collection. We're either this year installing or budgeting to be installed in the next year or so electronic monitoring stuff, so vibrating wire piezometers, automated survey monitoring stuff, you know, a wide variety of things which we'll link up. I've spoken to Inmarsat about some of their systems. There are others out there, but those will be linked up. We're obviously developing into the monitoring better. At the moment, our monitoring stuff is done manually by field staff. We're looking to have that done more often through the electronic means, and that's now coming towards best practice. We're making sure every day we have people go out and observe our facilities. So once a day we have inspection staff go out. Once a week we have a higher level of inspection. Once a quarter we have big internal inspections, and then once a year we have the third party. And some of our operations also have quarterly inspections from engineers of records and local authorities. Some of our sites are monitored by satellite for movement and for surveying. That's by Photosat. One of the things that we are trying to do is improving our weather data. Getting weather data on a daily basis that meets world's best practice from the Kazakh authorities is almost impossible. We are trying, but to meet best standards, so either to the Canadian standards, the Australian standards, the European standards, those require very good weather data. And so we are trying to obtain all that data, but it's been very difficult for us. So we're kind of starting from scratch with weather stations to collect our own data and then build that forward into how that will change with climate change over the next kind of sort of life of the mine of our projects. We're doing progressive closure of our facilities where we can. We're improving our deposition modeling so that we know where we're placing the tailings, so that if we can adjust and close certain sections as we go, then we're trying to do that. And we're building secondary seepage collection systems into all our facilities from now on. So we're moving forward towards world's best practice on a lot of this. And you know, we'd like to work with the Kazakh government as they develop the best practice to make sure that we get good legislation, we get good outcomes for tailings. One of the things for me is I'm passionate about making sure tailings is done right. It can be a huge impact on the industry. It is our largest source of environmental risk, as well as risk to populations. And so we need to take it seriously and move forward and capture what is best practice. So that's what I have for the moment. So I'm sure there'll be questions later on, but I'm pretty much done and can hand back to